Namaste, everyone, and a very warm welcome to ICERT EduTalk, Rethinking Family Obligations and Mental Wellbeing. I'm Dr. Navneet Kaur, Director, ICERT Sophia SDG Lab, educator, mindfulness coach, and principal at the Sri Ram Universal School, Ludhiana. Today's session is very special because this is not just an edu talk, it is a safe, reflective space for honest conversations. At ICERT, we believe that learning is not only about academics, it is about understanding human emotions, relationships, and healing. And today we are exploring a topic that many feel, but very few are able to express openly. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Lisa D. Stinson. Dr. Stinson is a clinical psychologist specializing in complex PTSD, narcissistic abuse recovery, adult children of dysfunctional families, and the psychology of toxic family obligation. She brings with her deep clinical experience, including her work as a Navy psychologist, where she worked closely with trauma patients. Her work is deeply rooted in understanding intergenerational trauma, emotional healing, and human resilience. And most recently, she has authored a powerful book, The Obligation Myth, Rethinking What You Owe Your Difficulty Aging Parent. Welcome, Lisa, on the board. Dr. Lisa, we are truly honored to have you with us today. Before we begin,
Thank
I would
you.
invite you to take us into this important conversation. Let me ask in this way, what inspired you to explore this topic? And what is the core message you wish to share with our audience today? Platform is
Oh
yours.
gosh. Um, well, over the last 20 years, I've been working in clinical practice. The idea of kind of these toxic family systems sort of around this idea of the narcissistic family dynamic with individual roles, the scapegoated child, the golden child, the invisible child, kind of how that looks within the context of a toxic family system. And I was interested, maybe it's because I'm getting older myself, but um, seeing this through the lifespan and where people my age now are looking at taking care of their elderly parents and what that means. I actually did a piece of this as part of my doctoral dissertation about 20 years ago related to family violence and that caregiving dynamic. So that's why I finally got around to writing this book. Okay.
You can start with your 30 minutes presentation and then there will be question round from your presentation.
Okay. And you can see me and hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly fine.
Okay. Um, all right. So I want to actually begin with a phone call. But before I describe it, I need to be precise about whose phone is ringing. And I'm not talking about the adult child of a loving, imperfect parent navigating the ordinary difficulties of aging. I'm talking about the adult child of a narcissistic, abusive, or toxic parent. Someone who was harmed systematically, repeatedly, and often invisibly by the very parent now asking for their care. Someone who survived emotional abuse, physical abuse, possibly sexual abuse, chronic neglect, gaslighting, scapegoating, or the devastation of growing up in a family system organized entirely around a narcissistic parent's needs. So, this is a distinct population. And I want to be precise about that distinction from the outset because the moment we start to blur it, the moment we treat this as a variation of ordinary caregiving, we lose the clinical thread. So now the phone call. It arrives after dinner. She's just sat down. Her body is beginning to relax for the first time all day. The name on the screen belongs to her sister, an aunt, the hospital social worker. She answers, already bracing for impact. There's been a fall, a diagnosis, a hospital discharge, and her difficult parent can no longer live alone. Now, this person built a carefully maintained radius from her difficult parent, close enough to function, far enough to breathe. She spent decades surviving this person, learning how to go quiet in the face of criticism, learning how to swallow her anger, how to keep one hand on the door at all times. And then the question comes. So are you going to do anything to help? And now, because age has entered the room, everyone is speaking as though the past has been completely erased. Now, I've heard some version of that question, are you going to help or not, in my office for the last 20 years. I've heard it from the 34-year-old woman who hasn't spoken to her mother in 6 years. I've heard it from the 58-year-old man who drove 4 hours every Sunday and still feels like he's not doing enough. I've heard it from clinicians, people like you, who treat trauma survivors all week and then go home and cannot figure out what they owe their own difficult parent. So that question, what do I owe them, is the topic for today. Not because it has a simple answer, but because the way we answer it, or fail to, has profound clinical consequences for our patients, and sometimes quietly for ourselves. Now, there's something uniquely charged about the word owe when it enters the family system. It transforms relationship into transaction. It converts love into a ledger. It takes a complex emotional bond, the bond between parent and child, and reduces it to a question of debt and repayment. So when an adult child asks, what do I owe my aging parent? They've already stepped into an economy of obligation, a moral marketplace where they're expected to calculate payments, interest, and what constitutes adequate repayment for the gift of life. The human relationships aren't quantifiable, and the language of debt is fundamentally the wrong language for this question. Minuchin, in his foundational work on structural family therapy, documented how dysfunctional family systems use coercive structures to enforce compliance, including the weaponization of obligation. In narcissistic family systems, what presents as duty is more accurately understood as a conversive control mechanism. It's not mutual, it's not reciprocal, and it's not the same thing as genuine relational care. So here's what the transactional framework implies. And I want you to hear this clinically because your patients are living inside these implications every day. It implies that parenting is alone, that every diaper changed, every school feed paid, every late night spent nursing a feverish child was logged in as an IOU. It implies that children are born already indebted, not as sovereign beings, but as liabilities with a pre-existing balance due the moment they draw their first breath. And the most damaging of all is that it implies that care must be repaid in full, regardless of the quality of the original relationship, even if the parenting was neglectful, even if it was abusive, if it was emotionally absent for decades. The debt within the context of this framework is still presumed valid, and it weaponizes guilt beautifully, efficiently, and often invisibly. And you know the phrases, your patients know them by heart. After everything I've done for you, you'll regret this when I'm gone. I changed your diapers. I paid for piano lessons. I went to your high school ball games. Now you owe me. Now, each of these statements does the same thing. It reinforces the debt narrative, deepens internalized guilt, and insists that the obligation is absolute, regardless of history, regardless of harm, regardless of the adult child's own mental and emotional survival. From a Jungian perspective, what is happening here is precise. The adult child's ego has been colonized by the parent complex. Their core sense of self is overshadowed by unconscious, autonomous emotional patterns that originated in the parent and that continue to operate. And as clinicians, our first task is to help our patients distinguish between guilt that comes from their own conscience and guilt that was installed by someone who needed their compliance. They're not the same thing. And treating them as though they are is a common mistake that I see and work with this population. So before I move into the internal voices, I do want to address something that is sitting with us here today because it's sitting in our patients' phones, it's sitting in their social media feeds, and increasingly in the assumptions and presuppositions they bring into our office. Just go no contact. It's everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, hundreds of thousands of upvotes. And it gets the clinical reality almost entirely backwards. The social media version of no contact prevents estrangement as a starting point, as a quick fix, an empowerment move available to anyone who decides that their family is difficult. Block, delete, move on, all in the name of self-care. But I want to offer the research instead. A 2016 study of family estrangement found that adult children who initiate estrangement do so after years and often decades of repeated attempts at repair, boundary setting, and hope. Estrangement is almost never the first move. It is the last. It comes after countless conversations, disappointments, and injuries that were never acknowledged. Sharp and Thomas in 2016 found that estrangement is a process, not an event, one that unfolds over time, involves significant ambivalence, and is rarely experienced as the clean liberation that social media suggests. Kaur and his colleagues in 2015 documented the ongoing grief and complexity that characterizes estrangement even when it is the right decision. But the social media version of no contact skips over all of this, skips the grief, skips the ambivalence, it skips the failed repair attempts, the guilt that doesn't go away, the complex mourning of a parent who never existed as a safe emotional presence. Social media presents a last resort as a lifestyle choice. And this matters clinically because our patients are arriving in our offices having been told by an algorithm, by a Reddit thread, by a wellness influencer with zero clinical training, that they should already be further along than they are. That if they still feel guilty, they haven't committed hard enough to their healing. That ambivalence is weakness. But it's not weakness. It is the appropriate emotional response to an impossible situation. So our clinical task is to hold the complexity that social media flattens, to help our patients understand that estrangement, when it is the right choice, and sometimes it is a last resort reached after cumulative harm. It's not a trend, not a starting point, and not something that resolves the grief for the parent who never existed as they needed them to. Estrangement requires clinical support, not a hashtag. So let me introduce you now to a framework that I've used in my clinical practice that I find indispensable with this population, and that's the internal board of directors. So most of us operate as though we have a single unified self making all of our decisions. Calm, reasonable adult, sitting alone at a desk, weighing all the options. But depth psychology reveals a more crowded truth. We're governed by a collection of voices, complexes, and archetypal energies, each with its own agenda, each with its own history, each trying in its own way to protect us or get us something that we need. I think of it as a boardroom, a long table, many chairs, and every seat occupied by a different part of the psyche, each one convinced that it knows best, each one talking over the others. And when it comes to decisions about aging parents, that room gets really loud. And the problem is the patient's oftentimes not in the room at all. They're standing outside the door, listening to the chaos while the loudest voice at the table drives. Carl Jung called these voices complexes, autonomous emotional patterns formed in response to early experience, operating outside of conscious awareness, repeating the same psychological scripts for decades. For adult children of narcissistic or toxic parents, some of these complexes are not organically formed. They're implanted. Psychic structures installed by the toxic family systems programming, operating with the same autonomous power as the organically formed ones, but serving the parent's agenda rather than the child's authentic psyche. So I want to name you some of the voices that your patients are living with. The guilty child. You're a horrible, selfish person if you don't drop everything. She raised you. She sacrificed everything. You owe her this. This complex is desperate to finally be good enough. It internalizes every past criticism. And for the adult child of a narcissistic parent, this voice is the primary mechanism through which the parent continues to extract emotional reactions. What the guilty child is protecting against is being seen as the bad, selfish, or unlovable child, the core wound that the narcissistic parent installed. For this complex, compliance feels safer than condemnation. They'd rather sacrifice their own well-being than risk that verdict. The wounded child. Stay away. Remember the yelling, criticism, the neglect. Every time you get close, you get hurt. Just protect yourself. This complex is still holding the fear and pain of childhood. For survivors of severe abuse, this voice is not irrational. It is a critical protector, and it deserves to be heard, not overridden. What the wounded child is protecting against: re-traumatization. This voice remembers, at a somatic level, exactly what proximity to this person cost. It's not irrational, it's the body's earliest and most honest alarm system. The hopeful child. What if this time is different? She's vulnerable now. Maybe if you give her enough, she'll finally see you. This could be your chance. This is perhaps the most painful voice in the room. Clings to the fantasy of repair. It believes that more effort will finally unlock the love that was always withheld. And it is the voice that keeps adult children in caregiving arrangements that are destroying them, because they're not really providing care. They're still auditioning for the parent who will never love them unconditionally. What the hopeful child is protecting against: grief. As long as hope remains alive, the patient does not have to mourn the parent who never existed as they needed them to. The fantasy is painful, but it is less painful than the finality of that loss. Clinically, when the hopeful child loosens its grip, grief almost always follows. But that's not a crisis, that's progress. The angry protector. Let her suffer. She made you suffer her whole life. Withhold everything, do not give that woman an inch. This voice is furious at past injustice, and it's not wrong about the injustice. But when it drives, it often produces outcomes that the adult child may struggle to live with: missed final moments, unresolved grief, a hollow victory that costs more than it was worth. What the angry protector is protecting against: further victimization. This voice has decided, with justification, that it'll never be harmed again. The anger is not the problem. The anger is often the first healthy response this person had to what was being done to them. The clinical problem arises when anger alone drives the decision, without the integration of the other voices. And then, quieter than all the others, the authentic self, the conscious, integrated adult who can hear all of these voices, acknowledge what each one is trying to protect, and then make a decision that is grounded in values rather than fear. This voice doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It says something along the lines of, I can offer practical support twice a week because that aligns with my values, but I will not engage in conversation that re-traumatizes me. This is what I can sustain. This is what I can live with. What the authentic self is protecting: the patient's wholeness. Unlike the other voices, the authentic self is not protecting against something. It is protecting us towards something. It integrates the guilt, the wound, the hope, the anger, without being governed by any one of them. It is the voice that can hold complexity without being destroyed by it. And it is the voice our clinical work is trying to reach. So now, the clinical work is not about silencing any of these voices. It's about helping your patient take their seat at the table and to become the chairperson of their own internal board, to hear all of the voices, to understand what each one is trying to protect, and then make the conscious integrated choice rather than being hijacked by whichever complex is the loudest. That's the work. It's slow and it's hard, but it is important. So I want to turn to something that I believe is underaddressed in the clinical literature on this population, and the profound degree to which the caregiving crisis isn't a new crisis at all. It's an old crisis wearing a new outfit. Family systems therapy, Bowen, Minuchin, gives us a robust framework for understanding how dysfunctional family systems assign rigid roles to children. So from a Jungian perspective, these assigned roles are essentially personas imposed by the family's unconscious collective complex. They are not reflections of the child's authentic self. They were assigned, designed to serve the narcissistic parent's psychological needs and maintain a dysfunctional equilibrium within the family. And when the parent ages and requires care, the family system does not dissolve those roles, reactivates them. The scapegoat is expected to prove their worthiness by stepping up. The invisible child is expected to remain unnoticed, silently absorbing the burden. The golden child is pressured to manage everything flawlessly. The enmeshed child is expected to continue their lifelong role as the parent's emotional anchor. So let's walk through each of these briefly, because I find that when clinicians understand the role a patient inhabited in childhood, the caregiving crisis becomes more legible. The scapegoat was the one who was blamed for the tension, the conflict, the family's general unhappiness. They were called difficult, dramatic, ungrateful, impossible, and they heard it so many times that part of them began to believe it. From a Jungian perspective, the scapegoat carries the family's shadow, all of the unwanted, repressed aspects that the narcissistic parent refused to acknowledge within themselves, projected onto this child. Research suggests that 30 to 40% of dysfunctional families utilize scapegoating mechanisms, often to divert attention from parental conflict or deeper systemic dysfunction. For the scapegoat who endured physical abuse, the caregiving crisis presents a specific and underaddressed clinical reality that they may be asked to provide intimate physical care, such as bathing, dressing, wound care, and toileting, to the same person who beat them, the hands that struck them, the person whose physical presence their nervous system learned in childhood to read as a threat. Bessel van der Kolk is very clear on this. The body keeps the score. Proximity to the abuser does not suddenly become safe simply because that abuser is now old and frail. And so I want the clinicians here today to sit with that for a moment. We're not talking about discomfort. We're talking about a full body threat response, organized around decades of relational injury, being reactivated in the context of what the rest of the family is calling just helping out. Key triggers for the scapegoat in the caregiving context: physical proximity to the abuser, which can activate hypervigilant threat response even when the parent is physically diminished. The parent's tone of voice, a particular look, a familiar critical or devaluing phrase, stimuli that bypass the frontal cortex entirely and lands directly in the amygdala. Sibling dynamics that replicate the original family hierarchy, reinstating the scapegoat role in record time. And why wouldn't they? If one person is going to take on the shame and the guilt and the criticism, why wouldn't their siblings default? Also being thanked or praised by the parent, which can be as destabilizing as criticism, because it violates the internal model the scapegoat has covered for decades, has carried along with them for decades. In the caregiving crisis, siblings also oftentimes will default their responsibility to the scapegoat, while the narcissistic parent continues to project frustration and shame onto the very person that they are now dependent on. And if the scapegoat were to set a boundary, that is experienced as proof of their inherent badness. So why this matters for individuation? The scapegoat's authentic self has been buried under decades of projected shame. Their journey requires first the radical act of returning that shame to its rightful owner and recognizing that the shame that they internalized was never theirs. Clinically, this means helping them trust their own perceptions, which were systematically invalidated, and honor their somatic responses, which are not overreactions. They are accurate memories stored in the body. The scapegoat who finds their authentic self oftentimes emerges with extraordinary moral courage, deep empathy born of suffering, and an unflinching commitment to honesty. Our clinical task is to help them get there. The Golden Child. The Golden Child was given a pedestal instead of a childhood. The view from up there looks like love, but it's not love. It is a performance contract with no exit clause. The Golden Child was the one who was praised, but that praise came with a cost. They were held up as proof that the family was fine, that the parent was good, that everything was working. Their achievements were celebrated, but the love was conditional based on their performance, and somewhere they always knew that. The Golden Child's wound is the one most likely to be dismissed by the family, by society, and sometimes by the clinician. They were not beaten. They were not ignored. They were, by all appearances, the favorite. But the clinical reality is this: they were loved for what they produced, not for who they were. Every achievement was the parent's achievement. Every failure was a betrayal. The self that existed beneath the performance, curious, uncertain, imperfect, real, was never safe to show. And that is emotional abuse. It simply arrived in a gilded frame. Alice Miller described this as the gifted child who learns to anticipate and fulfill parental expectations to secure love, developing what she called the false self. The narcissistic parent loved the projection that they placed on this child, not necessarily the child themselves. Key triggers for the Golden Child in the caregiving context: being asked to manage something that they can't do perfectly, or to admit that they cannot handle it, which activates the core wound. I'm only valuable when I perform flawlessly. The parent's expressions of disappointment or withdrawal, which still function as a threat to the nervous system even in adulthood. Siblings who abdicate responsibility, leaving the Golden Child to either maintain their good child identity or shatter it by refusing care. Inheritance conversations, which reactivate the transactional nature of the relationship and make explicit what was always implicit. Love was a contract. Why this matters for individuation? The Golden Child's individuation requires the terrifying act of dismantling the false self, the persona of perfection that earned them conditional love. Clinically, this often presents as a period of profound disorientation. If I stop performing, who am I? Our task is to help them grieve the loss of their special status that was never truly about them, and to discover, often for the first time, what they actually want, feel, and need when no one's watching. The Invisible Child. The invisible child learned a survival skill so effective it became a prison. The ability to need nothing, ask for nothing, and take up as little space as possible. In the caregiving crisis, the family finally notices them, not because they matter, but because they're useful. The invisible child was the one who disappeared, not dramatically, quietly. They learned early that asking for comfort was a mistake, that the fastest way to peace was to become low maintenance. The family called them easy. What they meant was easy to overlook. Maybe there was no violence. There may have been adequate food, clothing, and shelter, but there was no attunement. No one who tracked the child's inner life, reflected their emotions back to them, or communicated that their inner world mattered. Downing and Walker both document how this absence produces adults with a profound structural deficit. They do not know how to identify their own needs because no one ever helped them learn. They're not withholding, they genuinely don't know. For the invisible child, the caregiving crisis contains a particularly cruel paradox. Being needed can feel like being loved. The family suddenly knows their name. They are called upon, relied upon. And the invisible child, starved for decades of exactly this kind of visibility, may find themselves unable to refuse, not out of obligation, but out of a desperate, unspoken hope that usefulness might finally become belonging. Clinically, this is one of the most important distinctions we can help them make. Key triggers for the invisible child in the caregiving context: being needed, which activates the hope wound simultaneously, finally being seen, while knowing at some level that the seeing is conditional on their utility. Being overlooked, again, when their contributions go unacknowledged, their opinions dismissed, or siblings make decisions without consulting them, reinstating the original wound that they don't matter. Asking for help, which requires them to violate the core survival strategy that kept them safe. Need nothing, take up no space. The parent's emotional demands, which the invisible child has no template for refusing. And completing the caregiving role, which may trigger a profound emptiness. If I'm no longer useful, do I exist at all? So why this matters for individuation? Because the invisible child was never really given a role to perform. They often have the clearest access to their authentic self. It was always there. It was just never witnessed. Their individuation is not about dismantling a false self. It's about giving the real self permission to emerge into the light, to take up space, to have needs, and to be seen not only because they're useful, but because they exist. Clinically, this work often begins with the radical and unfamiliar act of asking them what they want, not what they can manage, not what they can offer, but what they want. The enmeshed child. There's a particular kind of closeness that is not closeness at all. It's consumption. The enmeshed child was not loved, they were absorbed. The enmeshed child was the one who was never allowed to fully leave in the first place. Their feelings were the parents' feelings. Their choices were their parents' business. They were recruited, sometimes gently, sometimes not, to manage the parents' moods, soothe their fears, and keep the emotional machinery running. Saying no felt like they were being disloyal, and it may still. Enmeshment exists on a spectrum. At its less severe end, it produces adults who struggle to differentiate their feelings from the feelings of others, who feel responsible for everyone else's emotional state, who cannot locate the boundary between where they end and another person begins. At the most severe end, enmeshment shades into sexual boundary violations. The parent who treated the child as an emotional spouse sometimes also treated them as a physical one. For these survivors, The caregiving crisis does not simply reactivate emotional enmeshment, it reactivates the body. Intimate physical care, bathing, dressing, toileting a parent who sexually abused them isn't a caregiving decision, it's a re-traumatization event. Asking a survivor of parental sexual abuse to provide intimate physical care to their abuser in the name of family obligation requires trauma-informed intervention. The enmeshed child also experiences what the clinical literature calls parentification, a role reversal where the child assumes inappropriate levels of responsibility for the parent's emotional and practical well-being. Jerkovic documents how parentified children develop a blurred sense of self, their identity intricately fused with the parents, leading to a profound failure of individuation. So, key triggers for the enmeshed child in the caregiving context: physical touch or intimate care, for survivors of sexual abuse, can trigger a full somatic flashback response, the body reliving what the mind has tried to contain. The parent's emotional appeals: "You're the only one who understands me," a phrase that functioned as a leech in childhood and probably functions as one still. Setting any limit with the parent, which activates a terror response that is not metaphorical. For the enmeshed child, differentiation was never safe. The parent's expressions of need or vulnerability, which the enmeshed child's system is wired to respond to automatically before the conscious mind has any sort of chance to intervene. And other family members stepping back, leaving the enmeshed child alone with the parent, replicating the original dynamic of isolation and exclusive emotional responsibility. In the caregiving crisis, caregiving is not a new demand. It's a continuation of a demand that has never stopped. And the narcissistic parent will escalate precisely when the adult child is most depleted. And the enmeshed child, whose entire identity was built around a parent's needs, may not experience refusal as a choice. They may experience refusal as an annihilation. So why this matters for individuation? The enmeshed child's individuation requires what may be the most frightening act in the entire clinical landscape: the discovery that they exist as a separate person, that their feelings are their own, and that their needs are not a betrayal of their difficult parent. Clinically, this work is somatic. Cognitive reframing alone cannot reach a nervous system that learned that differentiation was dangerous. We must also work with the body. We must help them locate, slowly and carefully, the felt sense of where they end and where another person begins. That boundary is the frontier of their healing. So I want to close with the question that I believe sits beneath all of these others. Not what do I owe my parent, but rather what does my authentic, integrated self choose to do? That's a different question. It's a harder question, and it requires the adult child to separate what they were conditioned to feel from what they actually value, to distinguish the guilt that was installed from the conscience that is truly theirs, to hear the voices at the internal board table, and then to take their seat as the chairperson. Carl Jung called this individuation, lifelong process of becoming one's authentic self. The role your patient was assigned in childhood does not dictate who they must be as an adult, and who they must be as an adult in that caregiving situation. The scapegoat is not eternally the problem. The invisible child is not eternally unworthy of being seen. The golden child is not eternally required to perform. The enmeshed child is not eternally their parents' emotional property. These were roles assigned to our patients before they were old enough to refuse. Our work, their work, is to help them see the design, to understand how the family trained them to confuse pressure and performance with love, and to give them, perhaps for the first time, the clinical clarity and the permission to choose something different. That permission is not selfishness. It is not abandonment. In many cases, it's the first genuinely free choice they've ever made. So much of what I've shared with you today is explored in depth in my book, The Obligation Myth, Rethinking What You Owe Your Difficult Aging Parent, which is a guide for adult children of narcissistic, toxic, or abusive parents, which publishes today. It's written for abuse survivors, but I wrote it with clinicians in mind as well. And I do hope that you'll find it useful in your work. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. That was not just insightful, it was deeply moving. I'm sure many of us are reflecting silently right now because somewhere these experiences touch very personal spaces within us. These are thoughtful, non threatening, reflective questions which I'll be asking now. I'll be inviting even the participants, all the viewers. If you have any questions, you can write in chat box. I'll be taking one or two questions and Lisa will be answering. Before that, I'll take one of my question which I want to ask you, Lisa. That is,
Yes.
uh, for an educator and parent listening today, how can we ensure that we do not unknowingly create environments that lead to these kind of emotional wounds in children? Like you spoke about internal voices, the guilty child, wounded child, hopeful child, how can individuals recognize which voice is driving their decision? So as an educator, how I'm going to understand these environments, you know so unknowingly
Right,
we create environments, unknowingly, unintentionally, we don't want that, that lead to these kind of emotional wounds.
right. So, so really, today's lecture and really what the book focuses on is that kind of toxic narcissistic family dynamic, where you have that narcissistic parent, you have an enabling parent that sort of protects that narcissistic parent that kind of keeps the dysfunction going, and then children are assigned roles within that family structure. You have your golden child, you have your scapegoat, you have your invisible child, um, and that really gets developed in the context of this dysfunctional system to kind of support that narcissistic, difficult individual that the family kind of orbits around, right? So um, they're projecting all of their shame and blame and negativity um, onto that scapegoat. They kind of take from that golden child for that sense of accomplishment, so long as they're not outshining them. Make me look good, but don't outdo me, right? The invisible child, that the narcissistic parent will project that that insignificance onto that child. So that's a very different family dynamic than, say, one of healthy, secure attachment. What we know from John Bowlby's work is that many many of our families out there are healthy. We have our healthy healthy families where the children are heard, their emotions are validated, they are seen and understood. They're allowed to exist in the sense that what the child finds important in their life is something that the parent will validate and support and be interested in, versus the parent who, okay, this is what my child is interested in, but I have no interest in that myself, so it doesn't matter or it doesn't exist. And so one of the best things that we can do for our children in bringing them up really is to be that supporting, nurturing, you know, validating adult in their lives, as opposed to the dismissive um, parent who projects their shame uh, onto their child instead.
Thank you. Thank you. Just another question has popped in my mind,
Yeah.
and nobody has written in the chat box. I'm waiting for some questions to come over there. You mentioned that estrangement is often the last step, not the first. So, what would you say to someone who is feeling confused or stuck between staying and leaving?
Stay off of Reddit.
Yeah.
Uh, um, so what I think that we see there on social media, whether it's TikTok or Reddit, kind of that "Am I the asshole?" you see on the Reddit threads, and someone tells that story, and everyone jumps in. Oh, you have to go no contact. This is abuse. Um, is to really look at the history of that individual. And so you've got the patient there in your office with you. Um, Actually walk through the history of that parent-child relationship with them. Is this a situation where um, they fulfilled that role of the scapegoat and they've been abused by that horrible narcissistic toxic parent from the time that they were 5 years old, and that was their experience. They've tried multiple times to set boundaries that have failed. The parent refuses to take any sort of responsibility or atone for any of their behavior. That is a different situation versus I didn't get my way. I had an argument, kind of a one-time argument with my difficult parent, and I just want to cut them off because that's what's in vogue on social media right now. And so I think as mental health providers, we can tease that apart, and we've probably been hearing it if we've been seeing the patient for a while. We've got that history, and you can say validate that yes, this sounds right, or if you're going to continue to be in this parent's life, it's not an all. It doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing sort of thing. It's gradated. And so you can maybe continue to have a relationship with that parent. However, you set strict boundaries and limitations and stay by them. Or understanding that, this is a relationship that isn't going to be an intimate, loving relationship with my difficult parent, where, I'm not going to pretend that I love this person. I'm not going to pretend that we have a close, loving relationship, but I can provide adequate caregiving by helping set them up with, a nursing home or having somebody come by their house a couple times a week, arranging a ride for them to get to their doctor's appointment, whatever the case may be. You can still provide adequate, responsible care if that's what you feel that you need to do for a parent, without necessarily having that emotional connection, and certainly setting that boundary where, okay, we'll have a I'll call you once a week, but if you start criticizing me and devaluing me and putting me down, I'm going to have to hang up now.
I totally agree, and especially today's Gen Zs, when this kind of thing come, their reaction is totally different. So
Yeah.
it's quick, they want quick response. Like we keep on scrolling the videos. Next, okay, it's not there. Next, gone into relationship also. There's one question
Right.
from Dr. Vandita. How do we understand dynamics of financial independence and emotional wellness, both in families and workspaces?
Okay. So say that again.
I repeat again.
Financial.
Yeah, the question is, how do we understand dynamics of financial independence and emotional wellness, both in families and workspaces.
Okay, well, that's a little outside of this particular
It's a participant
particular con
question, so I have to take.
um,
She must be
so,
having this kind of, she
right,
must be facing this problem actually. So she wants a
okay,
help from you.
okay. So, I actually would like to speak to this a bit in the context of the unhealthy family, and because this is one that does uh, come up for a lot of people. I have a big old section dedicated to. People talk about cutting off their families, um, not providing that, wanting to just kind of walk away from that whole situation. What do you do, speaking to financial issues, if there's a large inheritance involved? And there's that part of you that feels that you need to stay somewhat committed to some degree to the family system, dysfunctional as it may be, providing some level of caregiving to that dysfunctional, toxic parent or the enabling parent that allowed the abuse to happen and didn't step in to protect you when you were little. What degree of caregiving and support do you have to provide in order to maintain that relationship enough to, I guess,
Balance.
secure an inheritance?
Very true.
I didn't put that on the as part of the as part of the lecture, but that's one of the, you have your wounded child, your guilty child. The inheritance seeker is also a part of that. And so if part of that financial security, and managing that, and sort of thinking, okay, I want to be able to pay off the house and send my kids to college and retire at some point, that $2 million estate that my parent owns is really going to
Lisa,
go a long way
actually,
with
this
that.
girl, Lisa, actually, this girl is working with some NGO and wanted to understand further. She's working with some NGO. There, she's facing these kind of problems.
Working with
NGO.
NGO. Um,
It's like a charitable
so,
society, like a charity, non-charitable societies we have, non-profitable
oh,
societies, charitable
oh, okay,
societies. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there is someone part of the charity that is
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a girl who's working with the NGO. So she wanted to know this. That's why this question has come. Dynamics of
okay.
financial independence and emotional wellness, both in families and workspaces.
Okay. So what I would recommend, particular, I mean, really for um, any member of the dysfunctional family, there is to sit down and figure out what you can do without 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 that inheritance,
Great.
without that, so if that means, okay, do I pick up that second job? Do I move into what do I need to do so that the inheritance piece, this, this chunk of money, maybe it's coming from this nonprofit, where what do I need to do uh, to navigate? If that doesn't happen, I'll still be okay. If it does happen, it's a nice bonus, but it's not necessarily a requirement for securing my future, in a
I'll,
sense.
great
So,
answer. I'll take
is
some.
there a donor, or is there a donor that's particularly difficult? Or I guess I'm not fully getting the situation.
No, no, she's helping slum people like. So there she sees all these differences. So she wanted to help. I think she has got the answer. She needs to find the
Okay,
different ways, and whichever is coming first, she need to grab that, and that way she can move ahead. I'll take a quick
fine.
question. If you're nurturing, supporting, and doing all, and the child is still stubborn, how do you do? This is Olenke Amzi. So her question is, if you are nurturing, supporting, and doing all, and still the child is stubborn, so how do you do? What you'll be doing in that case?
Okay. So so you are so you're the so if I'm understanding the question correctly, Um,
Maybe as an
your
educator, I'm nurturing somebody, I'm supporting also, I'm trying everything that the child should grow in a holistic environment. But the child is stubborn. Nowadays, we are facing this problem. Being a principal, also, I see one or two children are there in the family. Parents are pampering them so much. Now they have become stubborn.
oh, I see. Okay, I see.
Yeah,
Yes. So where essentially there are the parent is setting no boundaries with the child.
okay.
Um, where the child you're saying that the child is kind of being allowed to kind of run wild, do what they want without any sort of rules or and that you're not necessarily getting the support from the parents in the classroom. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Um, so that's a tough question and um, so what I would recommend what is the child getting out of that bad behavior? So when the child, I guess, talks back, is disruptive in the classroom, pushes the limits, what are they getting out of that particular behavior? Even if the response is negative, they're still getting something out of it, right? Because they wouldn't continue to engage in that behavior if it wasn't benefiting them in some way, right? So so if I had a child, say, acting out in my classroom, um, I would want to know kind of what's driving that behavior. So what's going on at home? Is there even though the parents aren't necessarily setting limits or maybe they're being too indulgent, what's missing? What's not being provided for that child? That they feel that they need to sort of act out to get with other adults in the room. So I'm being ignored at home. If I act out in the classroom, my teacher pays attention to me. And that
Yes,
will
of course.
subsequently get my parents into the principal's office for a chat. And now my parents are paying attention to me. So what I would really want to know when I've got that child in front of me is what are they trying to get out of this particular
I feel he
behavior?
needs more attention. He wants a lot of places where he's not doing the one. He wants sympathy. He wants to grab others' attention. So he wants that importance should be given to him because somewhere he's showing the tantrums.
And so then is that attention that he's not getting at home? Or conversely, is he getting all the attention and he just figures that that's what the world owes him?
Maybe at home he's pampered, so he's getting all the attention. But in school, the one will get the attention who is performing so well, who is doing good in academics, who is doing good in sports. Every teacher, everybody will be liking that child. The child who is not doing work and showing tantrums, naturally, everybody will say he's a disruptive child or distractive child, right?
But negative attention is still attention when you're not getting
Attention,
it.
yes, of course.
Well, and something that's important too, when you've got those kiddos in your classroom, you've got the one that's seeking the attention and acting a fool there in the classroom. What about this child over here that's being very quiet, who
Exactly.
does what they're supposed to, that's engaged minimally? Maybe they're super helpful and trying to get um, some acknowledgement there, being that little helper. Just as important, what's going on with that child and what's missing at home.
If I have to answer, I'll just add one thing. See, as a principal, I have seen that every child is unique. So we need to identify which kind of learner he is. He is kinesthetic learner, auditory learner, or visual learner. So when I'm taking a class, I need to understand what kind of things can attract him. So I can engage him in those kind of activities. So being stubborn, if he'll be enjoying that, his engagement will be giving him some, positive kind of effects. And with that, if I'm giving the appreciation, then it is a genuine appreciation. Then that stubbornness will has to be at least minimized. Somewhere it will
And of course,
minimize.
and of course, sometimes that child that's the loner in the classroom is the child who's afraid to speak up, because speaking up at home gets them beaten, gets them criticized, and so hiding out in their room is the safe space, and they don't know another way. And so sometimes
Very
finding
true.
out a way to bring out that child in the classroom, to make them to help them feel seen, and validate their experience can go a really long way.
I feel we shouldn't tag any child. Being an educator, we should understand the psychology of the child, what exactly he wants. If he's coming up being stubborn also, we should need to understand the psychic behind that. What is his need?
Right.
So if we can
Right.
do that connect, then definitely things will be solved. I think Olenki, your answer is beautifully given by Dr. Lisa. And on this note, I'll be moving to the closing section because
Okay.
already 5 minutes above we have gone. Thank you, Dr. Lisa,
Oh,
for bringing such depth, clarity, and compassion into the space. Today's
thank you.
conversation reminds us that healing is not about rejecting relationships, it is about choosing them consciously. So at ICERT, we aim to create such spaces where learning meets reflection and knowledge means healing. Final sign off we will do with Dr. Lisa. It was really wonderful interacting with you, listening to you. This is Dr. Navneet, and thank you for being a part of this meaningful conversation. A lot of
Thank
hands still raised. There are questions. I'm sorry, I won't be able to take that. But many people are asking your presentation also. I can see in the chat box. So whatever Dr. Lisa has presented, if they can get the copy of that, we'll discuss with the core team and we'll get back to you. So
um,
yeah, you want to say?
absolutely. And I actually have a free Substack,
Okay.
and where I publish articles as well. Actually just set it up recently in relation to my book. And so if they have any further questions they would like answered, they can always message me through
So
Substack.
what I'll request Dr. Lisa, if you can chat box, you can write your either Instagram ID or Facebook or LinkedIn, so people can connect with you. You are on
Yeah,
which
that'd be
social
great.
media? You're on which social media?
Well, I'm not a I'm not a
Okay,
social media person,
okay,
but I'm on LinkedIn and Substack, so I can definitely get
okay.
you that information there.
Yeah, if you can just write in chat box your LinkedIn address
Okay.
or connect, so people can
I'm
connect with you. Or otherwise, you can just type there Dr. Lisa. So
I'm not really sure. Let me see. Chat box, chat box. This is why I have no social media. I
oh, that's good. I think I am happy with that. Please, you can type there Dr. Lisa D.
uh,
Stinson. So if you'll type that, you will are going to find her and you can connect with her.
okay.
So I've helped you. Okay, on this
Thank
note,
you.
we'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you to every participant who is present over here. Yeah, Dr. Lisa D. Stinson. Dr. Lisa, perfectly fine, Olenki. Yeah, Dr. Lisa D. Stinson. You can
Oh, there
see
we
it
go.
on
There's
our
chat.
the today's page also. It's marked over there. So stay aware,
Okay.
stay compassionate, and most importantly, stay connected to your authentic self. I have taken few words which were really touching me: authentic self, then internal voices. I was writing what Lisa was giving, parenting alone. These are my takeaways. I was writing clean liberation, authentic self. Each one is trying to protect voices, the golden child, gifted child. We really need to work on all these things. Thank you, Lisa, for opening another phase for me. So I need to go and learn from your book. And I'll request everyone to read this book. She has given all her experiences in this book. And it's like a living example for each one of us. Thank you, Lisa. On this
Right.
note, I
Right. This is it.
oh, it's wonderful. I'm going to read it and definitely we'll get back to you. The obligation myth. Thank you.
Yes.
Namaste,
Okay. Thank you
everyone.
so much for having me.
To ICRT for providing such a wonderful platform where we can connect with great expertise like you. I'm grateful to the core team, to the president, sir, Dr. Sandeep Sehag, everyone in the team who is working behind the scene. Thank you and namaste.
Thanks.